It is a practical approach that helps people who are doing their best to stay afloat and simply need a little more time to resolve their fines. In a city where so many people live paycheck to paycheck, we must recognize the financial strain these fines can cause. This bill doesn't excuse responsibility for parking violations. It simply gives New Yorkers a fairer, more reasonable timeline to address their problem without the fear of financial ruin. And I thank you, Chair, and I thank you, and I want to hear from you to see how the best way we can help, especially the middle-class working families in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Wan for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers, for convening this hearing today. Yael Zihin died at the intersection of 46th Street and 47th Avenue. Jada McLaurin died at 21st Avenue and 21st Street. Doma Nadun died at Newtown Road and 45th Street. We had Brenda Marmoles die on Vernon and 44th Drive. Diego Sesta on Queens Boulevard. These are just a few out of the 253 that died within the last year in the city of New York due to lack of daylighting and safety in the infrastructure of DOT. The lack of visibility at intersections across the city makes it incredibly dangerous for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists alike. 253 New Yorkers lost their lives due to traffic violence just this past year alone. That is simply unacceptable. You have blood on your hands. Universal daylighting is effective and it saves lives. Cities like Hoboken, New Jersey have implemented daylighting with remarkable success, reporting 0 traffic deaths since 2017. And indeed, over 40 states currently have laws that require vehicles to keep a distance of generally 20 feet from crosswalks because it is effective. Unfortunately, the DOT recently published a report in advance of this hearing calling into question that effectiveness on universal daylighting. Policy must be backed by good data, but the methodology of DOT's report is deeply flawed. DOT clearly began with a conclusion and then used flawed data to support that conclusion. In addition to universal intersections annually. Currently, DOT is required to daylight 100 intersections with hardened barriers each year. This is simply not enough. Imagine if we could save 55% of pedestrian deaths and 79% of pedestrian traffic injuries in New York City. With the passage of 1138, we can. Installing 1,000 hardened barriers each year will protect children on their way to school, seniors with mobility challenges, and every New Yorker, whether they are driving, walking, or biking. As a mother of 2 children, I cannot attend another press conference or funeral for a child in my district that was killed at an intersection while crossing at their right-of-way. It's time to implement universal daylighting and aggressively install hardened barriers at 1,000 intersections per year, as our children and our seniors' lives depend on it. Thank you for all the families who have lost loved ones, activists, researchers, and organizations who are here today to advocate for the issue who you see behind you. I hope you will remain for the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from our public advocate, Jumaane Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, my name is Jumaane Williams, public advocate for the City of New York. Good morning. Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure for holding this hearing. I did want to give a shout out to former Commissioner Bat Gatling from the Human Rights Commission, who's in the House as well. And I'd like to ask my name to be added to both of my colleagues' bill to reduce the parking fines, which is really important to give some relief, and to deal with the trucking parking, which I'm sure my mother and her neighbors would be very happy about. So please sign me on. But I want to talk a little bit more about the daylighting. New York State Law 1202 refers to daylighting as preventing vehicles from stopping, standing, or parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk at an intersection. Daylighting intersections has come to be respected as a street design intervention that improves visibility for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians. It removes blind spots for those who are walking, driving, and biking, helping all to see oncoming traffic, turning traffic sooner, increasing public safety. It was last report by the DOT in August 2024 that over 300 intersections were daylighted with a pace of to have 100,000 intersections daylit by the end of the year. DOT should release updated data through the end of 2024. As of now, 21 community boards in 4 boroughs representing over 2 million New Yorkers have passed resolutions calling for daylighting at intersections with physical barriers like concrete and blocks and plantings. Under the last published DOT Streets Plan in March 2025, recommendations were organized into 11 program areas, most of which will be affected positively by daylighting. One of the recommendations under the Safety and Vision Zero program area is to expand the use of proven safety treatments. On March 29th, a fatal accident at the intersection of Quinton Road and Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn took the lives of a mother and her young children. Following this harrowing accident, the NYPD shared September 2024 data that Transportation Alternative showed that there was a record number of New Yorkers killed or seriously injured by traffic violence. This increase demonstrates the need for Intro 1138, which requires the DOT to implement daylighting barriers at a minimum of 1,000 intersections annually, making daylighting a key priority. The DOT reported at the Committee of Transportation Oversight hearing on January 21st of this year that they have $5 to $7 billion dedicated to street reconstruction, quote unquote, street reconstruction priorities, including safety enhancements, accessibility improvements, and infrastructure maintenance. If the DOT remains serious about this life-saving priority, there should be a little challenge in working with the council on Intro 1138. I also know that the street violence went up even more in communities of more color and poorer communities, so we want to make sure that the infrastructure is happening across the board and equitably. And I also hope that our colleagues who talk a lot about bicycle safety, which we should, but join us on this, because most of the deaths and violence occurs with vehicles. And so we want to make sure we're dealing with the vehicle culture as well. My mother won't be happy about that, but we got to make sure that we are dealing with the culture that is causing the most violence in our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have been joined by council members Rivera, De La Rosa, Juan, Ariola, Lewis, Narcisse, Ressler, Williams, Joseph, Caban, Krishnan. Okay, now I will ask the committee council to swear in the administration.
Thank you. I'm Mark Chen, counsel to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee of the New York City Council. Our next panel will be from the Department of Transportation, Eric Beaton, Deputy Commissioner of Transportation Planning and Management, Joshua Benson, Deputy Commissioner of Traffic Operations, Rick Rodriguez, Assistant Commissioner of Intergovernmental and Community Affairs, and from the Department of Finance, Agnes Rusin, Assistant Commissioner for Payments, Billing, and Refunds from the Department of Finance. I'll now administer the oath. Please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Good morning, Chair Brooks Powers and members of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I am Eric Beaton, Deputy Commissioner of Transportation Planning and Management at the City DOT. With me today is Deputy Commissioner of Traffic Operations Joshua Benson and Assistant Commissioner of Intergovernmental and Community Affairs Rick Rodriguez. We are also joined by Agnes Rusin, Assistant Commissioner for Payments, Billing, and Refunds from the Department of Finance. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Mayor Adams and Commissioner Rodriguez on the Department of Transportation's efforts to improve and modernize the city's parking infrastructure. New York City is undergoing one of the most transformative and substantial changes to parking management since the advent of the parking meter, the transition to a license plate-based management system. Last spring, we began to retrofit the city's over 14,000 parking meters, converting meters from pay and display operation to pay by plate. With this new system, parking rights are tied to the license plate number and are sent electronically to NYPD's database, eliminating the need to display a receipt on the windshield as proof of payment, along with other benefits. The system also integrates seamlessly with mobile payment on the Park NYC app, providing a single structure for metered parking and allowing us to usher in new approaches to curb management. To date, nearly 2,000 meters have been retrofitted. The city has also advanced substantially in how we manage our curbside as we implement our curb management action plan, recognizing that in busy parts of the city, we need to prioritize active uses over long-term private vehicle storage. We use our curbs to provide pickup and drop-off access for people and for goods, to support roadway safety and public service delivery, to support the movement of vehicles and pedestrians and to be part of the public realm. New York City DOT has been leading the way in both innovating and scaling curbside uses, such as with our forthcoming micro-hubs within the Upper West Side Smart Curbs area. Now, turning to the legislation before the Council today. First, Intro 99, sponsored by Councilmember Williams. This bill would require DOT to establish overnight parking areas for commercial vehicles in each of the city's industrial business zones, or IBZs. The administration shares the Council's goals in addressing the need for truck parking in a responsible way, so we support this legislation and look forward to discussing some of the meaningful details, such as the ones you mentioned in your opening statement. Truck movement is critical to urban logistics and city life, ensuring the smooth flow of goods and services that sustain daily operations and economic vitality in our city. Trucks are on our street to deliver the goods that we all need and use, but we also agree that trucks being left overnight improperly can cause safety and quality of life issues. We work closely with NYPD to enforce against this behavior, but realistically, without legal options for overnight truck parking, we will only be shifting the problem to different locations. Allowing truck operators to have safe and convenient places to take mandatory rest breaks supports the safety of the truck-based deliveries we all rely on. Last month, DOT launched a new on-street overnight trucking parking pilot. The one-year pilot introduced a new metered parking option in 3 IBZs for commercial vehicles, including tractor-trailers, in an effort to improve parking compliance, provide a reliable parking option in industrial areas, and minimize overnight truck parking in residential areas. The 3 pilot IBZs are Flatlands, Fairfield, and Brooklyn, Hunts Point in the Bronx, and Maspeth in Queens, all industrial locations that are near residential areas plagued with illegal overnight truck parking. The locations were chosen for of streets allows for truck parking. We are currently reviewing additional locations for this pilot suggested by you, Chair, and by Councilmember Williams, and support further expansion as outlined in this legislation. Next, Intro 1138, sponsored by Councilmember Wan. This bill would prohibit standing or parking a vehicle within 20 feet of a crosswalk at an intersection, or require daylighting at all intersections across the city, installed at a minimum of 1,000 intersections each year. DOT shares the Council's commitment to enhancing safety for all road users, particularly our most vulnerable road users, pedestrians. We also share the Council's interest in enhancing safety at intersections. Last year, we redesigned 2,688 intersections with a wide range of treatments. We published Vision Zero Borough Safety Action Plans using a data-driven approach which show us where our safety improvements will have the greatest effect and help us determine where to implement projects. The plans identify priority corridors and priority intersections based on locations where the most pedestrians were killed or severely injured using multiple years of data. We then use our robust toolkit to targeted treatments that produce the greatest safety benefits. This approach is working. Traffic fatalities in 2024 were 15% lower than the year before Vision Zero began, despite the pandemic-era rise in dangerous driving. But let me be clear, one death is too many, and we have more work to do. While widely discussed, daylighting is surprisingly poorly studied in terms of its actual effect on safety. As promising as daylighting is in concept, the Chair was right to require an in-depth study of the benefits of this treatment in Local Law 66 of 2023. Pursuant to that law, DOT recently released the first of its kind study of daylighting's safety performance. The study found that while daylighting is a useful tool when used properly, it is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that indiscriminate daylighting could actually have negative effects on safety. The study also found that hardened daylighting, with physical infrastructure installed to prevent vehicles from occupying that space, does enhance safety, but that other safety interventions can also have equal or greater safety improvements. The results of the study were surprising, even to us, but speak to the importance of doing good analysis and then being willing to update our beliefs based on what we find. As part of this study, we did a few things. First, we reached out to cities across the country, large and small, to see if there had ever been a real analysis of daylighting effects, and we found no study that had ever looked at the effects on injuries. Second, we looked at the effects before and after daylighting implementation at 756 locations from 2019 to 2021, comparing against other similar intersections to account for the effects of the pandemic. This effort found that hardened daylighting contributed to statistically significant injury reductions, but that side-only daylighting had no statistically discernible effect. Finally, we looked at nearly 8,000 locations that were daylighted historically for non-traffic safety reasons, such as fire hydrants and bus stops, and compared again to other nearby intersections. This comparison found that locations with this restricted parking were correlated with statistically significant higher rates of injuries, which held even as we looked across different geographies and different types of intersections. Given these findings, DOT does not support the mandate for daylighting universally, as that could have negative effects on safety. We do not take this position casually. If this unhardened daylighting were implemented citywide, we think we could expect an increase of up to 15,000 injuries in a year. In theory, we would support hardened daylighting at all corners, but that cost would be in the neighborhood of $3 billion and would cover large numbers of locations without a history of injuries. We will continue to expand the number of locations with hardened daylighting and are happy to report that funds have been added to our budget to do more, but we must retain the discretion to determine where this treatment or others are most appropriate based on our engineering judgment. At the same time, we very much welcome the Council's interest in such a big step. Hardened daylighting is one of many things in our toolbox, along with other things with similar or stronger benefits, such as road diets, new medians, traffic signal treatments, and turn calming. Knowing that the sponsors of this bill are willing to repurpose so much vehicle parking, as many as 300,000 spaces citywide, or about 6,500 per council district, we would like to work with you on how we can best use this space to maximize street safety. We would also want to keep a strong focus on the most dangerous locations, a practice that has been very effective at reducing injuries and fatalities over the past decade. Lastly, Intro 340, sponsored by Councilmember Narcisse. This bill would allow the late fees associated with unpaid parking violations to be waived when vehicle owners respond between 45 and 90 days of issuance. While the administration appreciates the Council's intent to protect New Yorkers from overly punitive measures, we are concerned that the legislation would have unintended consequences. Specifically, this legislation would disrupt a carefully constructed escalating penalty scale that incentivizes 70% of violations to be resolved within 90 days of issuance. The city has gone a long way to ensure that customers have options to resolve their parking violations and debt, including the Pay or Dispute app that allows motorists to get a hearing and to upload evidence using their cell phones, and that the rollout of self-service parking payment plans in 2023. In conclusion, I would like to thank the Council for the opportunity to testify before you today, and we would now be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony, for getting it over. You gave me some reading to do last night. I'm going to start with some general questions and then move from there. So overall, how many parking summonses were issued in 2024?
So, Council Member, in fiscal year 2024, we issued 8.9 million parking tickets.
8.9 million?
Yes.
And how does that compare to previous years?
More or less it remains the same. I don't have the
Relatively
numbers
same, okay.
in front of me right now.
Do you have a breakdown by boroughs? Like where you're
No,
seeing
I
the
can
greater
provide
ticket?
it to you. I don't have with me, but we can provide it to you.
Okay. While we're in the hearing, if you could just have someone find out what that breakdown is by borough, I'd appreciate it. What are the most common summonses that are issued?
I don't have the breakdown with me, but we can share with you.
If you could find out, that'd be great. And as you all are looking for that information, I'm gonna assume the next question you may not have the answer to, but if you could get it, that'd be great too. And that is, were there specific neighborhoods where summonses were particularly high compared to others? So like what community has the most summonses? How has the Priority Investment Areas program addressed parking issues in historically marginalized and under-resourced communities?
So the priority investment areas were one of the things that we introduced with the streets plan, and gives us a way to really focus on the communities that have been historically underinvested in and have high concentrations of non-white and low-income population. So as with all of our programs, we think about where we're rolling out, whether it's new truck parking, new meters, or different types of pilots, and we try to make sure that they are being well represented within those areas. So for example, when we daylit over 1,000 intersections last year, as we developed those lists, we looked at them in priority investment areas to make sure that about half of the locations were in that top tier of priority investment areas.
Thank you. Does DOT implement specific measures to try and address parking violations in neighborhoods that have high numbers of summonses?
So I can't speak to the neighborhood specifically, but when we get reports of locations that are getting high numbers of summonses, that's an indication to us that there's something problematic going on there. Because the goal is not summons, the goal is to have a functioning curbside system. So when we get reports of those locations, we look at them, we talk to Department of Finance to make sure we understand what's going on, and we can adjust the curb regulations if needed.
Has congestion pricing eased the parking situation in the commercial business district?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So we've been monitoring the parking activity in and around the congestion pricing zone. That's part of actually the city's legal responsibility under the congestion pricing law. And it's a very new program, congestion pricing, so there's not a tremendous amount of data yet, but what we've seen is a slight decrease in the first few weeks of congestion pricing in the commercial parking activity inside the zone, and then sort of leveling off where now it seems more close to the historical number. So we'll keep monitoring it. It's early. We do think it's something that's subject to being influenced by the congestion fees. So we are continuing to monitor that.
Thank you for that. Do you know, has it improved loading zones in the CBD? And conversely, has DOT noticed any increased demand for parking in areas outside the CBD?
These are good questions. Are also things that we're gathering data on now. Outside the CBD, we did a big data collection before the program started, and we're going to do another one, later this year. Our report is due back to the state 18 months after the launch. So we're trying to capture, the activity kind of after people settle into their new patterns. So we have not captured that after data in the areas outside the CBD as yet. I would say anecdotally, the loading zones within the CBD do seem a little more orderly, even though the number of transactions, like I said, was slightly decreased and then kind of leveling off. It seems to be a bit less chaotic in general. So I think we're seeing better access to the curbside, more orderly access, and it's positive.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot to trucks and deliveries. Approximately 90% of the city's goods are transported by truck. With the rise of e-commerce, changing consumer behavior has led to an increase in deliveries to homes and businesses, resulting in a greater number of trucks on our roads. These trucks require parking spaces to efficiently deliver these goods to New Yorkers without impacting the surrounding communities. How has the landscape for trucking and deliveries changed since the pandemic?
Well, I think you put it quite well. We've seen a lot more deliveries to residential areas. It used to be that 60 to 70% of deliveries were happening to businesses, and we're now seeing more than half of deliveries happening to residential areas. I mean, just people are not going into work every day. Patterns have changed, and so we've had an increase in issues on residential streets. People concerned about double parking and trucks driving where they really shouldn't be, and that's why we are implementing more loading zones around the city, including in residential areas, to make sure that they have places to safely pull to the curb. It's why we're undertaking the truck route study to see if there's changes that need to reflect the different patterns there. It's why we're trying out this micro-hub program to try to have trucks stop in a place where they really fit properly and then have the last mile delivery by cargo bike or hand cart. So I think there's been a big change. I think we're really working to keep up with it. We certainly have a lot to do.
Is DOT assessing the city's truck routes, and how can DOT implement better access areas while also ensuring that trucks are not increasing congestion in residential areas?
Yes, so we are, as mandated by the council, but in a good way, reviewing the city's truck route network, which has had very limited changes since first implemented in the 1970s. I think we want to find the right balance where, we don't want to encourage trucks to go through residential areas, but, where they do need to go to make a delivery, we want to make sure that they are confined to the busiest streets. And there are portions of the city that don't have much truck route network, and the result of that is that trucks can sort of take whatever street gets them to their destination the fastest, which is not always the street that trucks should be on. So, I think truck routes are something, sometimes people get very concerned about them. I think the way to think about them is that they're really a restriction on trucks, that they have to stay to the truck routes. And that's why we want to make sure that we have enough of them in the right places to be able to control truck traffic that's going to these areas.
Thank you. In terms of the overnight truck parking pilot that you all launched, could you briefly describe the federal mandated breaks truckers are required to take, and how are these requirements enforced?
So the federal requirements, and I'm trying to see if I have the details in front of me, but it mandates rest periods after a certain amount of time. And what really changed wasn't the change in federal requirements, but it was the monitoring that trucks now have to have devices that actively monitor these things. So where a truck might previously have flouted those limits a little bit, the federal enforcement is much stronger. And so we do see trucks behaving better, which is obviously what we want in some respects, but it does result in an increase in the problem of these trucks parking on city streets when they've reached their time of service limits. That in turn is enforced by NYPD. Right, so they have to rest after 14 hours. Thank you. So it's a combination of federal enforcement of the rest requirements and NYPD enforcement of where they can or cannot be on city streets.
Thank you. Can you please provide the committee with an overview and update of the overnight truck parking pilot? How were the truckers informed of these parking locations, and have they been making use of them?
Sure, it's an important question. We're only a few weeks in, so I can give you a few anecdotal observations, but then we'll certainly be willing to discuss more once we're more into it. But we worked with the trucking industry and with social media to get the word out about these locations. What we've seen is pretty good use. Some are paying the meter, some are not. but the behavior in general seems to be what we would want to see. I think some of the zones have been better used than others, and so we're trying to make sure that the word is getting out in all the boroughs. I think what we want to see is the flip side as well, that we want to see less truck parking in residential areas, and that's where we're really too early to be able to say what's happening for sure. But the fact that they are parking here is a good sign that they were not parking somewhere else.
Can you let us know what additional locations you're looking at for the next expansion of the program?
Sure. Our original intent was to follow these 3 locations for a year. Obviously, we've heard from you and from Councilmember Williams that there's more interest, and so I don't think, we're not going to say that there's no way we can add locations because it hasn't been a year. I think we are looking at the locations you've provided. There's also been some interest from Staten Island, so we are looking at other areas around the city. But the idea is that we want the same types of criteria. We want to have locations that are industrial land use and not residential. We want them to be convenient to highways and to major trucking routes so that we don't have trucks going through local communities to get to these places. We need the streets to be big and wide enough that, large trucks can get there safely and in large numbers. So we're looking for the same types of locations, but we think where there's interest, we can do more around the city.
Has DOT collected any data on the performance of this program so far?
So not yet. We're just a few weeks in.
What are your expectations going forward?
So our expectation is that these will be well used. We think there's such a demand for truck parking in the city that they will be well subscribed to, and that as a result they will be in these locations and not in the nearby residential locations. Now, obviously, like 3 locations around the city is not something that we say will solve the entire problem, but if this treatment works as we expect it to, it's something we could look at in other parts of the city as well.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm going to pivot now to daylighting. Local Law 66 of 2023 also mandated that DOT study the safety benefits of daylighting. DOT released a report in January of this year titled Daylighting and Street Safety and Analysis, which you referred to during your testimony. To the surprise of many, the report concluded that while hardened daylighting can provide safety benefits, universal daylighting might not be as effective as expected. Daylighting, including universal daylighting, is widely accepted as a best practice by numerous jurisdictions and organizations. Are they all wrong?
Well, I can speak much more confidently about New York City because that's where we did our study and that's what the data speaks to. But I will say that there's a long history in transportation planning of people thinking that things were safe that turned out not to be. There was a period of time where everyone thought that wider, straighter roads and separating pedestrians out would make things safer. And in reality, we found the opposite. And we've now spent a lot of effort undoing some of those decisions that were made decades ago. And so, I can't speak to other places and how they've been thinking about it. But daylighting is an interesting place where people have, including us, have felt that it would be contributing to safety. And we looked at a very robust set of data that was troubling to us. Part of being data-driven is taking things even when they're not what you expect and being able to work with them.
What other jurisdictions did you reach out to when you inquired about their analysis of daylighting benefits?
So it was a very long list, many of which is listed in the report. But locally it included Hoboken and other neighboring cities. Nationally, we worked through the National Association of City Transportation Officials. But
Did you reach out to like Nassau County, because they have daylighting almost all over?
Well, we reached out to a lot of New York State jurisdictions just because there is that law around the state. New York City actually has a lower rate of pedestrian injuries than the rest of New York State, despite being the only jurisdiction that to be exempted. So, we talked to Yonkers, but we also talked to San Francisco and Chicago and Washington, D.C., like to other cities that have some of this, in some cases rules on the books, in some cases not. But we didn't find any of them that had done this look at injuries to see what was going on.
Well, speaking of Hoboken, Hoboken across the river reports significantly fewer collisions or injuries as a result of daylighting. Why do you think their conclusions differ from their experiences?
Yeah, I mean, first, we are very much appreciative of everything that Hoboken does. They've been a terrific member of the city community, and including their work on daylighting and also road diets and hardening and other things that they've done. A lot of their daylighting was very historic and actually related to the narrowness of their streets and the ability for vehicles to make turns. As far as we can tell, including reaching out to them, they've never done a study of those effects. I know that they've talked quite a bit about it, and I don't have any way to say that they're wrong, but we were not able to find anything that really speaks to what the actual effectiveness was, knowing that it's one of many things that they've done to have such a good safety record.
Daylighting is focused on removing visual obstructions closest to intersections, mainly curb parking spaces, in the hopes of increasing visibility for pedestrians and drivers to make our intersections safer for everyone. The City Council, again, passed Local Law 66 of 2023, requiring that DOT implement daylighting at a minimum of 100 intersections a year beginning on January 1st, 2025. What work is DOT undergoing to ensure this requirement is met?
Yes, so last year we implemented daylighting at over 1,000 intersections, including about 300 where we included the hardening. So I think we are very committed to not just meeting but surpassing the requirements of that legislation. And we have a unit that tracks all of this so that we are able to make sure we are on track and doing it equitably around the city.
Your conclusion against universal daylighting appears to come out of your study of areas where daylighting is created due to the presence of a fire hydrant or a bus stop. How did you determine that these locations are an unbiased representation of all city intersections or otherwise correct for the bias? Bus stops are located on larger streets, and we don't know what factors led to a fire hydrant being located at an intersection.
Yeah, that's a great question because it really gets to the core of the report, right? If there's a difference, then the results are not necessarily meaningful. So, for example, on bus stops, when it was an intersection with a bus stop, we looked at other intersections similar to that. So other intersections with bus routes, with bus stops in similar neighborhoods around the city. So comparing like to like. About 90% of the intersections were actually related to fire hydrants, so the fire hydrant question is important. And when we looked at it, the placement of fire hydrants appears both reasonably random, when I say reasonably only because you don't see two fire hydrants next to each other, right? They are distributed, but some blocks have them at the corners and some blocks don't. Some of them have them on both sides of the street and some don't. They were installed by many different governments at many different points in history. And we feel strongly that they are representative of other areas around the city, as long as you compare to other similar locations, right? You wouldn't want to compare a small residential street with a hydrant to a large arterial without.
Okay, my last question before we hear from other council members. Even if the conclusions are accurate, your report suggests that these fire hydrant and bus stop zones might be more dangerous due to risk compensation or more aggressive turning. Aren't there measures we could take to mitigate these risks, such as Nick Downs, or other measures that we could implement in addition to daylighting in order to make the intersection safer?
Yes, absolutely. That's the right point, that where we do this, we can do either hardening or other types of treatments to reduce the risk. You know, our turn calming program has been very successful and is often accompanied with daylighting, and that seems to be successful. I think the challenge is when you talk about, 44,000 intersections, each with many corners, we're not reasonably going to be able to do that at all locations. So we would be creating these locations that in any kind of reasonable short term would not have that additional infrastructure.
Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to council member questions. I just ask that my colleagues pay attention to the clock. We will have round twos if necessary because we have almost 100 people signed up for today. We'll next hear from council member Narcisse, followed by council member Joseph.
Once again, thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. And before I start, I have to say rest in peace to Pope Francis and all the Roman Catholic that's suffering today, knowing that we have an angel above. I want to say that I heard you, but the bill that I proposed, the 340, it is not to disrupt the penalty structure, but to provide a reasonable, we want to be reasonable and to be fair for those that cannot, an opportunity to catch up, to respond to the violations. That's the whole goal of it. And some of the recommendation that you propose, I think is not practical for those that cannot, because some folks want to, let's be honest, and there's a lot of challenges around. You printed out the they pay or to dispute the app and self-serving parking kiosks as an option for residents to resolve parking violations, right? So I want to know, what data do you have on how effectively these options are being used, particularly by low-income New Yorkers or those without access to smartphone?
So, Councilmember, thank you for your questions. I don't have the numbers in front of me when it comes to the usage of the Apple mobile app. I will provide it to you.
But now, it's a problem, because the fact that you don't think it's a good idea, but you're not giving me data to help me process it better, to see how we can, actually be fair to those that have a lot of challenges, especially financial challenges, to pay their tickets. So we're trying to bring solution to the problem. Given that approximately 30% of parking tickets in New York City, about 5 million tickets remain unpaid, even with the current penalty escalation system that you have. How effective do you believe the system is encouraging compliance?
So, Councilmember, the respondents have several options to address the parking violation. One of the options is to have a hearing, and there are several channels to request the hearing, either by walk-in to one of our business centers, or request the hearing by mobile app or by mail. And also, it's very convenient to pay the parking violation even before the first penalty is added.
In all due respect, it's not practical, because if you have people not being compliant to what you have, the structure you have to look into the challenges that we face in New York City, especially for the middle class. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Joseph. Also, we've been joined by Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier, we talked about what are the barriers to implementing more daylight spots across our city? Are they primarily staff-related, funded-related, or something else?
Thanks. That's a good question. I think the challenges, particularly as we think about hardened daylighting, is it's both staff and money. Right? We need money to be able to buy, whether it's concrete blocks or bike racks or other things that we put in the space. Mm-hmm. And then we need staff that goes out and installs them and maintains them over time as things get moved or damaged So at an individual location, it's not extraordinarily expensive, but when we, as we try to scale it up, we start to need those additional resources and need to make sure that we maintain the space over time. And then you pass a threshold, and at some point you need not just more people, but more locker space and buildings for them to muster, and you need more vehicles, trucks to bring the granite blocks out. So, I think we do as much as we can with what we have, and we also try to balance which treatment is the right level of treatment at different locations within the budget we have each year.
Is there a comprehensive plan to look at daylighting universally across the city?
So we start from the other direction, which is what are the most dangerous intersections in the city?
And
Where
have
are
you
we seeing
identified them?
crashes? And when we have identified them, and then we go to each of them and we say, what is the right treatment here? And sometimes it's daylighting, hardened daylighting. Sometimes it's something else. It's a road diet or something else. But we try to make sure that we match the right treatment to the right location that where we're seeing the crashes.
And what's the timeline on when you do identify those locations to provide the proper treatment?
So it varies. We every few years we put out a new Vision Zero action plan that identifies both the corridors and intersections where the most serious injuries happen to pedestrians, and then we work through them over the course of a few years. So sometimes something happens, and we, if it wasn't on our list, we might have to respond very quickly. Sometimes a project involves more construction, and we might have to spend more time doing the design and getting it lined up. But the idea is to match the level of intervention to what the intersection really needs.
I have a street in my district on Dorchester Avenue where a lot of older adults and children go to school, and we've been calling for daylighting on that corner since I've been in office, almost 4 years. There's no study. I'm still waiting. And this work, as again I've mentioned several times, this is personal. I've lost 2 students to traffic violence. These are students I should be celebrating their graduations, I should be celebrating any other thing, but not burying them, right? So this is personal work for me. When we talked about Hoboken, they haven't had an accident in 8 years. Are you looking at other cities to see their models and what's working and what's not working, and how can we apply some of that to New York City?
Yes, absolutely. We look both at nearby cities like Hoboken and others, but we also look at the other, large urbanized areas, the Bostons and Philadelphias and Washington, D.C.'s.
Any takeaways?
So first, we are doing much better. New York City has seen a reduction in fatalities and serious injuries that has been outpacing our peer cities around the country. So we feel very good about that, even if, as you say, there's much more to be done.
A whole lot more.
I think that there are innovations that have happened in other cities around things like materials that are more durable, and I think we've picked up some things about intersection design from other cities that we've incorporated into our work, because it's a very good community of, we shouldn't be jealous of what other people do if they've figured something out.
Not jealous, but learn, right? Best practices, that's what we do. We learn
Exactly.
from other cities and apply those methods. How long does it take?
Sorry, Councilmember, if this could be your last question.
Oh, yes, sure, sorry. When you say that a certain number of intersections have been daylight, does that mean just one space, or that means an entire section? And how long does it take for an entire section to get done? And I'll come on the second round. Thank you, Chair.
Sure. That number is the number of individual locations. Often at an intersection, it does not make sense to daylight all corners because it depends on the direction of traffic and where the crosswalks are located. So when we do daylighting, we do it at the places where we think it's most impactful.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councilmember Banks. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Lewis, followed by Councilmember Juan.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, all, for being here this morning. We recently had 2 separate near tragedies in my district outside of Great Oaks Elementary School and the Cortelyou Elementary Schools, where families were endangered navigating to school. I wanted to know what physical and enforcement measures does DOT consider for school zones to better protect child pedestrians? What is DOT doing to address the ongoing issue of school buses and large commercial vehicles occupying curb space in retail zones during the day? And has DOT considered new regulatory approaches such as restricted hours, permits and requirements, or designated loading zones to reduce harmful and disruptive bus and truck parking in commercial corridors, which impact both public safety and economic activity.
Yes, so speaking first to the question about schools, we take school safety very seriously, and it's incredibly tragic when incidents happen, or even if they almost happen. And so we have an extra focus, and we put together a youth safety action plan last year that really looked at what treatments should we be doing. And to some extent, it's similar treatments, right? It can be road diets, it can be new crosswalks or hardened daylighting, but with an extra focus on areas where a lot of children are present. We also wanted to look at the area more broadly around the school, because in some places we found that the most dangerous intersection isn't always the corner where the school is, but it's the
Surrounding
2 blocks away where they have to cross the
Well,
big street.
can that measure be implemented by these 2 schools?
Yeah, we will look into it.
And then just the additional questions on what is DOT doing to address the ongoing issue of school buses and large commercial vehicles occupying curb space by retail zones?
Thank you for the questions, Council Member. So the school bus operations are mostly contractors working for Department of Education, so we'll be happy to follow up with them on if there's a specific location.
There's specific locations all around the city.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
happening everywhere.
No,
But is DOT also working with DOE
We do.
and NYPD to implement?
We do, and so they refer to that as parkouts. So when the bus operator has completed their morning run and they're waiting to do the afternoon run, they find somewhere convenient to park, and it's kind of just like killing time. So we do work with them on that and try to discourage it from locations where it's not appropriate or having a negative safety effect, and happy to follow up on more specific locations. And then with respect to the loading activity in general, we absolutely try to accommodate loading at the curbside rather than double parking. So in many retail corridors, and certainly throughout Midtown, we have truck loading zones or commercial parking, and we're always looking to expand upon that. And that's a dynamic situation because stores open, close, and new developments happen. So we're always looking to, do better and find
We should
places
follow
that we may
up.
have missed. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we have some
would be
locations.
happy to.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Juan?
I just want to respond to DOT's no study claim, what you just said on record. The Federal Highway Administration issued a report showing that restricting parking near intersections can reduce pedestrian crashes by 30%. Daylighting in Hoboken has had no traffic deaths in the last 7 years. And San Francisco SFMTA published a report on daylighting after it was implemented in the Tenderloin area that showed 14% fewer reports of collisions at intersections. Just want to make sure that's on record under oath. Soft daylighting methodology, we're going to start there. In DOT's report on daylighting, you state research found that universal daylighting as evidence in DOT's hydrant zone analysis does not have widespread safety benefits anticipated and may have negative effects on safety. That's quite a bold claim. How does DOT explain the success of daylighting in Hoboken and other cities? Hoboken has not had a single traffic fatality in 7 years and sees continued reductions in injuries. DOT analysis used hydrant zones, in air quotes, and bus stops, 90% fire hydrants, 10% bus stops, as a proxy for daylighting without physical barriers to conclude soft and unhardened daylighting could adversely impact safety. However, hydrant zones are chronically blocked by illegal parking in New York City. Bus stops are even worse. By nature, they have buses in them, blocking visibility and achieving the exact opposite of daylighting. Furthermore, since the crash data lacks granularity, it is unknown whether crashes actually took place on the side of the intersection with a hydrant or bus stop. So how can DOT claim that soft daylighting can potentially have an adverse effect on safety when you use such a flawed proxy for soft daylighting? Can DOT say definitively that an increase in injuries at these locations was a result of cars not being present and there being greater visibility? This analysis includes many factors and variables, some of which were, in your own words, discarded due to redundancy and lack of statistical significance. I'm sorry, but you can't just throw out results you didn't like. That's called cherry picking. Given that this analysis includes hundreds of comparisons, did you apply multiple comparison corrections to control for false positives? If not, how can you claim that the hydrant's effects were statistically significant? So we'll start there.
All right, there were a lot of questions there, so I'll do my best to respond, and if I miss any, feel free to point me back. But just first to the point about studies, I was specifically talking about studies that showed the effect on injuries. We're aware that San Francisco and a few other places studied crashes, but none of them studied injuries. And when we reached out to ask that question, they were clear that they hadn't. But it's different cities. It's a piece of evidence. That's why we included it in our own report to be comprehensive. In terms of the hydrant zones and the methodology question, I think we acknowledge that we cannot know who is parked in any location at any given time. We think that will be true under universal daylighting too, that people will sometimes be parked in these spaces because that's what we see around the city is people park in any open space. So in that sense, I think we think that it's very similar and that we can mandate it. It doesn't mean that the spaces will always be open and, in that sense, provide a good comparison.
But that's why we're asking for hardened daylighting so that people can't park there.
Yeah, and we are very supportive of hardened daylighting. We think it is helpful.
So let me just remind you the questions. How can DOT claim, so for DOT, you could definitively say that an increase in injuries at these locations was the result of cars not being present and being greater visibility?
So what we said is that locations that have this daylighting that did not come from a traffic safety study, those intersections have a higher rate of injuries than intersections that do not.
For those locations, there are just two different spots, soft daylighting and 52-foot-long bus stops with pedestrians. So can you help me understand, given that analysis includes hundreds of comparisons, did you apply multiple comparison corrections to control for false positives? And if not, how can you claim that any of these hydrant effects were statistically significant?
Yeah, absolutely. And in looking at thousands of locations, we put it through a number of different filters to try to see if anything was showing a statistically significant result. And, we tried to, if you separate it by borough, does it work better in some boroughs or others? We looked at it by, traffic signal versus stop sign, and do one of those show a difference? And so when we say that we didn't look at a variable, that's not to say that we didn't look at it. We did a test and looked at the statistical significance and found that it wasn't there, despite comparing across these many thousand intersections.
Councilmember, I'm going to just ask you to do round two. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Williams, followed by Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you. I'll just ask my question. So I just wanted to know how you came up with the locations in the current pilot. I also want to know, did you conduct any specific evaluations prior to the implementation, whether it be consultation with local precincts, community boards, the IBZs themselves? And what evaluations do you plan to do, or have you already done with the pilot around enforcement strategies, so lighting, pedestrian safety, and security conditions, and how any of these tools will vary depending on the local conditions? So like a part of this is like a carrot and a stick. And so, yes, it's great. We want to make sure there's parking for trucks, but we also want to make sure that we are properly enforcing, because without that, we're not really solving the issue. It has to be both in tandem and simultaneously.
Yes, absolutely. And we've worked very closely with NYPD and a number of our sister agencies. I'm not going to be able to list them all, but sanitation, there were some DEP issues. We worked with all of them. We did reach out to community boards and other local stakeholders for all of them. But the idea is very much that you have to enforce to make this work, right? That trucks aren't going to willingly go to a less convenient location and potentially pay a meter unless they're being enforced against elsewhere. But we also find that the enforcement works better if we have a way to tell them not just you can't be here and can't be anywhere, but that you do have a reasonable place to go. Because otherwise, it just shifts the problem from one place to another. So we fully agree. In terms of the three locations for the pilot, they were selected based on trying to find streets in IBZs, streets that were wide enough that trucks could travel them without any issues, locations that were adjacent to the truck route network so that trucks didn't have to go off route to get to the locations, having fronting land uses that were appropriate. They're not residential. They're generally fairly blank frontages. So we did all that, and then we picked these three. I think we know that they're not the only three in the city that will meet those criteria. So we are looking at how it's going and are happy to work on other locations as well.
Thanks.
Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Brewer, followed by Councilmember Banks.
Thank you very much. I should know this, but the 2 spots that you have on the Upper West Side for delivery, are they working? Because I have to say trucks are double parked everywhere.
The new micro hub zone's coming very soon.
Okay, that's why the trucks are still parked everywhere. My question is, the concern about daylighting. The issue for us is just like how we don't work in a silo. For instance, with the schools, that's a priority for you and for us. It is so hard to get a crossing guard. You almost cannot get one. So then would you be in touch with the schools that have requested or the areas that have requested? Because if you are requesting a guard and you can't get one, then that would indicate to me that there are traffic issues that should be addressed, perhaps by daylighting. Is that something that you would normally do, coordinate proactively?
So we do coordinate very closely with NYPD, who runs the crossing guard program, and locations where they tell us that they feel like there's an issue, which could be because of any number of reasons. We focus on those locations in addition to where we get from the data, because so we do acknowledge that sometimes there's something on the ground that has to be looked into. So we meet with NYPD on a very regular basis to go over issues.
Do they give you the list of the requests for the crossing guard?
They do not give us the exact list of crossing guards. They do tell us. Sorry, they do not give us the list of requests. They do tell us when they feel like there's a location that they are not feeling is adequately addressed.
I love the cops, but I do think that they don't always have the whole picture in sight. So again, I'm always concerned when agencies work a little bit in silos. I hope that you would get that in the future. The other question I have is, I do think that, I know that we're down on people getting injured or dying, but I don't think it's down enough. So my question would be, if you're not doing and you're not supportive of the daylighting in every location, which is something that I think there's a lot of hope for because of the risk of pedestrian safety, do you look at other locations, other places, or other ideas, signage, better lighting, and then increased enforcement of traffic laws, which is almost an impossibility because we have so few staff to do this? But are there, like, every single intersection should have some way of being safer? Is that something that you look at, or is it all reactive and not proactive?
No, absolutely. We agree. And that even though we feel like we've done a lot, there is absolutely a lot more to do. What we try to do is we start with the places that have the most crashes, the most injuries.
I understand that, but
and within our set of resources, we work in that direction. We agree. Like if we could snap our fingers and make improvements at every location at the same time, we would do that.
Because you're hearing today from my colleagues that there are locations that have not been addressed. So then that says to me that, with all due respect, there really is a crisis, and that other locations need to be dealt with in a proactive way. So you don't have enough staff. Nobody has enough staff, but this is life and death.
Yeah, we're happy to work with you and the other members on any place that may be missing through.
But you don't want to have daylighting universal.
We think that universal daylighting would not be in the direction of improved safety.
All right, I don't agree. Thank you.
Councilmember Banks, followed by Councilmember Joseph.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the DOT. Quick question. I have some concerns about the daylighting of the intersections as far as when it comes to, and this is, I think, a direct question, will there be loss of parking spaces with daylighting?
So, yes, but the inherent nature of it is that we would have to restrict parking on the approach to intersections.
Okay. And when we talk about proper placement, I think that was brought up earlier. Are we having conversations with local community boards, local block associations, to get input on making sure that the proper placement is done for these particular these intersections?
So yes, we have a set of standards that we apply first, right? You don't want to daylight the direction that traffic isn't coming from on a one-way street, right? Like there's a set of things that apply around the city, and then we do outreach, so we try to match the level to the level of intervention. Okay. We change about 100,000 signs a year. I think if we had a community board meeting for each small change, it would, we would
Well,
not
we
be
didn't
able
say
to
a
do as much
community
as we
board
do.
meeting, but making sure you get an input from the community board and from the district manager and the chairs or the chair of the transportation committee for each respective community board would suffice.
Yeah. And our borough commissioners are regularly in touch with all stakeholders, including the community boards, to let them know about what's happening in the communities.
Excellent. I know when it comes to jurisdiction and ownership of streets, especially with the Gateway area of my district, we've obviously been going back and forth with DOT over those particular streets, and I know there's supposed to be a transition that's supposed to take place. In those communities, I know in the Gateway area, then in the Jewel Street area, are there any plans to do daylighting there
So
in those intersections?
we do not have specific plans there, in part because they're not yet our streets.
Well, that's what I said. Is there any plans
I do
to
know-
do that? Because there's a school located right on Flatlands in Elton.
Yes.
And obviously those streets are not regulated. You do have some corners that do have stop signs, and then you have some corners that have makeshift stop signs. Will you commit to take care of some of those needed regulations for those particular corners?
Yes, as we take ownership of the streets, we can address all of that. And we are starting to think about what would need to be done there so that we're ready. There's obviously a lot on like Vandalia Avenue.
Yes, Vandalia, correct.
So we are getting prepared, but until there are streets, right, there's some challenge there.
And the last thing, again, I just want to point out a major concern is the loss of parking. That's something obviously my office, especially in those particular areas where there's a lack of parking, there's a need for more parking spaces for those particular areas, and we definitely have to take in consideration that we understand there's a need for safety, but when folks have to double park and block the street late at night just to get parking, that shouldn't be. So if you're gonna do things to take that stress off of residents, that's something I would support. But if it's definitely gonna put a strain on already scarcity in parking, that obviously something that I'm not a supporter of. Yes.
Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Joseph, followed by Councilmember Ressler.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a couple of other questions. In your previous hearing, you estimated it would take about $10 million to daylight an additional 1,000 intersection annually. If DOT were given that money, would you be able to daylight 1,000 additional intersections this year?
So the answer to that is no, because we would need a little bit of time to hire the staff and to purchase the equipment. It does take some lead up time between when we get the money and when we're able to do that. I think we're happy that there was money put in the budget as part of the January plan, which is allowing us to start ramping up now. But at any moment, if we get more money, we have to work on buying the next set of things and hiring the people.
How long would it take you to staff up the office the way you would like it?
It varies, but something like 6 months to a year from when we get the money. You know, we have to post and go through the full process, and then, you know, work through any hiring freeze issues that may still be out there.
And you said it would require signage at every spot, therefore it would be expensive and it would take too long, just as you just testified. However, we don't have signage at every hydrant. We don't have signs at every intersection that say no right on red. If universal daylighting is the law, why would signage be required?
So that's a good question, and something that we could talk more about. I think what we see elsewhere in New York State is that where it's not signed, it's not obeyed at all, even though it's technically on the books. And so I think we would have concerns that people would not obey, and then to the extent that they got tickets would feel very upset because they didn't necessarily know the law. You know, certainly we could do a very large educational campaign. There may be other ways to get at it, but over time we feel like you would want signs out there to communicate more clearly.
Correct, because I'm noticing there are new bus signs on the bus lanes now telling them this is only for bus, so I think that should be a rollout that you'd probably consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Ressler, followed by Councilmember Wan.
I'm talking with Councilmember Banks about a book we were just reading. This is an important hearing, though. I really want to thank Chair Brooks Powers for creating the time and space for this conversation around daylighting and other issues, and I really want to thank Councilmember Wan for her important leadership on this issue and all the folks who are here for their support. And I was going to ask a similar line of questioning to Councilmember Joseph, so I'll shift in a different direction. Deputy Commissioner Beaton, in my office, we did a survey of constituents across District 33 of where they would like to see daylighting. And we got tons of feedback. We got hundreds of responses of places where people are really concerned about safety. And I'm not going to mention all of the different horrible crashes that we've experienced that seem to have directly been a result of the lack of daylighting. But last August, we combed through the whole list, provided 107 recommendations to DOT of where we wanted to see daylighting. How many do you think we've seen daylighting implemented 10 months later, 9 months later?
Not something I have in front of me.
What would you think would be a reasonable expectation for a council member?
It sounds like you have an answer.
The answer is 2, right? So we're trying our best to advocate for intersections that we know are unsafe. Your testimony here today is saying you don't think universal daylighting makes sense, but you recognize that when you harden intersections, it does save lives, it does make streets safer. We should focus on the most dangerous intersections in the city and get that done. But as a council member who has a very good working relationship with DOT and talks to your teams all the time, I'm at my wit's end because I keep bringing these same corners up that are notoriously dangerous, that my constituents are scared to cross the street, that people with a stroller are putting themselves in harm's way and their babies in harm's way every single day because they can't see when they're crossing, and 2 out of 107 get fixed in the better part of a year. Like, do you think things are working well right now, that DOT is doing an adequate job in addressing daylighting conditions?
So what I would say in response is that we have to be careful to not only be driven by requests that come in, because if that were true, we would be working entirely in your district and nearby districts, right? We know we get many more 311s and many more of these complaints brought to us in certain parts of the city. And part of our role needs to be to, within any fixed budget, to make sure that we are applying treatments equitably around the city. And to do that, in addition to the requests that come in, we look at the data and make sure that we are working even where we didn't necessarily get the requests that came in. So I always wish we could do more. If you ask me whether we should be doing more, the answer will always be yes. But in any given moment, we try to make sure that we are using our resources as best we can around the city.
I appreciate that response. Councilmember Joseph has sponsored legislation, passed legislation to, ensure that there's some daylighting happening, but we're not seeing it materialize in our districts at anywhere near the scale that we need. And so the only choice we have is to support legislation like Councilmember Wan's that just demands it across the board because there's no other way to get DOT to be responsive and partner with us. It's not just about my constituents being active and outspoken, which they are, and I'm proud of that. And some of them are even here. But they know their streets best. They walk them every day. And they're giving me and you their expert input on how to make their neighborhood safer, and I'm getting 2 out of 107. So that's 2% in the better part of 10 months of dangerous intersections daylighted. That's not working. So if we're not going to do a universal approach, as your testimony insists, and I disagree with that, I think we should, but if that's not what you want to do, then we need to see a robust, muscular approach from DOT for how we're going to tackle the 1,000 most dangerous intersections in New York City in the next 12 months and get that done and show that you're serious about making these intersections safer, because the status quo is not working. Thank you.
Thank you. Does DOT want to respond to that? Any commitments? No? Okay.
We are happy to work with you on identifying the most dangerous intersections and how to work.
But I've done that. I mean, I did that. I gave you 107, and we can go through the traffic data for exactly why these are the right places. And the idea that two have been resolved in 10 months, that's incredibly disappointing, right? And it's deflating, and it makes my constituents feel like nobody's listening, that nobody's working to address their real safety concerns. You may not have done 107, and I wouldn't have dinged you if you had done a substantial number, but you basically did nothing. And that doesn't work. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So next we'll hear from Councilmember Wan, Councilmember Williams. Just ask everybody to please abide by the time, because we have even more people signing up now.
Thank you so much, Chair Brooks Powers. And I just want to underscore what Councilmember Ressler has said. 100 daylighting intersections is not enough. People are dying every single day. We had more than 200 people die last year. So if at minimum you would do at least 250 to make sure that every single intersection where someone has died is daylit. So I want to talk about before and after analysis. DOT conducted a before and after analysis, but the execution of the analysis was deeply flawed. The data looked at 567 soft daylit intersections and 189 hardened daylit intersections. The latter then broke into 5 different subgroups of daylighting, some with only a handful of samples, which is to say this study appears severely underpowered. The before versus after data in these intersections was then contrasted with nearby control intersections with daylighting. How was the minimum required sample size determined for this analysis, and was the minimum met for all subgroups and groups? What criteria were used to select these intersections? Were there any efforts in comparing intersections with similar characteristics, such as traffic volume, land use, traffic signals, signage, and intersection makeup? I'm going to ask another question since we're going to be out of time. According to the same study, hardened daylighting has a significant safety benefit, but is not as effective as other treatments. The report claims that on average, hardened daylighting reduces injuries by only 0.14 injuries per year per intersection. It also stated that other safety treatments exist, such as neck downs, which significantly reduce injuries by 0.5 injury per year. Are neck downs a form of hardened daylighting? If yes, then how can you claim that neck downs are more effective than hardened daylighting as a safety treatment when it is a type of hardened daylighting per your definition? And if you believe no, then why did you include them in your hardened daylighting category?
Sure. Good questions that I'm happy to get into. First, just in terms of the before and after study and the sample size, we looked at every intersection that had been daylit between 2019 and 2021. The reason we chose that time period is that it was the most recent where we could get 3 years of after data as well as 3 years of before data. So we feel very comfortable that hundreds of intersections times 3 years of before and after data is actually a very robust sample, and the statistical significance tests support that. So we feel very good about that. More would always be better, right? Like if you could study everything forever and add more and more intersections, you would get more and more sample size. But we do feel very comfortable with the number and amount that we looked at, particularly with the number of years before and after. And then in terms of neck downs, I think there's one way to look at neck downs as the absolute best form of hardened daylighting, right? Where they do that, but they also do more. They provide the shortened crossing for pedestrians. So they are sort of hardened daylighting plus, which is why we looked at them a little bit separately. When we looked at the hardened daylighting in that 2019 to 2021 period, we did look at neck downs as part of that. So they were included. We want to highlight that as a treatment, they do more than just daylight the intersections.
Okay, so it is hardened daylighting and it works and it does more than just what you're describing. So can you still answer, were there efforts in comparing intersections with similar characteristics such as traffic volume, land use, signal, signage, intersection makeup?
Yes, we tried to compare as well as we could. Now, every intersection in New York City is different, right? We all know that, and we don't want to say we can match exactly, but as best we could, we found peer intersections that we could compare to.
How can you compare 189 hardened daylit intersections to 14 neckdowns when the 14 neckdowns are included in the sample size of 189? What post hoc analysis was used for the comparison of subtypes, and do you claim the sample size of just 14 intersections is sufficient for this type of analysis for the city of New York, the largest city?
So the reason that we feel very comfortable saying that neckdowns are so safe is because over the years, we've done a much larger study of our different treatments where we've looked at neckdowns and turn calming and road diets and other things, so that we do have that data from other studies as well.
So can you just clarify, if neckdown data is being used to support effectiveness of hardened daylighting or to diminish it in favor of other safety treatments?
So I may not be following. Hardened daylighting, including neckdowns, is effective, and we support it. Okay. And we feel comfortable based on the sample size saying that.
Okay, so you're in support of hardened daylighting using neckdowns?
Neckdowns and other treatments, yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Williams.
Thanks. Just a quick question on how the lack of truck parking also affects this other important topic that we're talking about today, which is daylighting. So in certain areas, IBZs, I know like the Gateway JFK IBZ bid, there is daylighting, but there has been complaints, and I'm sure this is consistent across the city because no one community is particularly unique, but people are actually taking down the sign. So I know we want more, but what are you actually doing to preserve what currently exists? Because people, especially that live close to IBZs, especially in areas like Southeast Queens that happen to drive one or more cars, the majority of the people also want parking. Daylighting takes away parking, but a lot of times it's the trucks that are parking there, not even like residents. So if you could kind of explain how are you preserving what you actually have, whether it's daylighting or other types of like tools and treatments?
It's a great question and very, it gets complicated, to make all of these tools work together and when you get to a specific location. Just in terms of general maintenance, we keep records of all the sign installations, the dates, we inspect periodically, we restore the signs, we take requests from 311, other city agencies to restore signs if they're missing. So, that's kind of the baseline of any sign maintenance. But with respect to the daylighting and the truck parking, I think that's, as we get further into this, we'd like to tackle that issue, right? As we're putting out the overnight truck parking in more and more industrial zones, can we fine tune and tailor the daylighting to complement it? Something that I think has been very helpful with these pilots of the overnight truck parking too is that, as Deputy Commissioner Beaton mentioned, NYPD has been collaborating, doing a lot of complementary enforcement. Part of the enforcement they're doing is in the overnight truck parking location itself to make sure people who don't belong there are not parked there so that it will be available for the trucks when they get there. So just increasing the presence of enforcement, increasing the activity has been beneficial. But certainly, gives you the ability as you're doing these to tailor the daylighting to those locations where the trucks are meant to be.
How often do you inspect for signage? Do you have like a regular cadence of inspections, or do you only check for signs after a 311 complaint is made? And then how long does it take you to replace the sign once a complaint has been made through 311 or another mechanism?
Sure. So there's a couple of mechanisms. Obviously, there is 311 and specific complaints. We have a couple crews that are dedicated to where inspectors go around the city and just look for things that are wrong, which can include missing signs, can also include poles that are down or things that are problematic out there. We also tell all of our crews when they're going to any location to make sure that they're addressing anything that they see at that location. So we don't want a crew that goes out and changes just one sign and doesn't notice that the other one's missing. That there's an inspection before everything that we install to make sure that everything in that area is correct, so that when we send a crew out, they're very efficient and can fix whatever is in that area. So we sort of have those three different chains. It's the general inspections around the city that they don't get to every block of the city every year. We take the 311s and other community requests, and then we also just have our regular crews that make sure that they are looking at all of these as they go out to do the work.
Thank you.
Councilmember Juan.
I just want to wrap up. In your research, you can't have one group take out a subgroup and then compare the subgroups to the whole group. I just want to make sure that it's clear from my perspective, this study was nothing other than trying to disapprove the effectiveness of hardened daylighting. But I'm going to move on to budget since we're running out of time. DOT has informed my office that it estimates that it costs $10,000 per hardened daylit location for labor and materials. But to have capacity to handle 1,000 hardened locations per year, DOT would likely need 20 additional staff, totaling about $2 million for staffing, a total of $12 million to comply with this law. If the cost of labor and materials is already included in your $10,000 per intersection estimate, why do you need an extra $2 million for staff on top of the cost of 1,000 intersections? Does labor get more expensive per intersection when DOT scales up? For intersections that are daylit using rain gardens, is the cost and staff time from DEP subtracted from your estimate? And what is the fastest that DOT could implement 1,000 daylit locations per year? What could speed up this timeline?
So we're looking for just the 2 million number, but the 10,000 number, obviously that's a very round number, rule of thumb estimate to get at things like the cost of the blocks and the day-to-day cost of the labor to put them out there. When we put together a full budget need, we have to think about both the purchase and the maintenance of vehicles, the space and the maintenance of space, the cost of gas, the cost of needing to go out and move the materials every time the street gets repaved and then put them back. So there's the cost of doing it once, and then there's the cost of maintaining it over a long period of time. And we're happy to discuss the numbers in more detail, but that may be where the difference is.
Okay, it sounds like it's unclear. It's not really set in stone. But I will yield my time so that we can move on to hearing testimonies from all of these people behind you.
Thank you. I have my round two questions, but I'm going to forego most of them also in the interest of time. I did want to talk about something district specific. I gave the commissioner a heads up, so they probably sent you a message already by now. And that is regarding the new bike lane policy along the boardwalk. I understand that's Department of Parks, but I wanted to understand what coordination, if any, happened with the Department of Transportation. So right now, from Beach 73rd to about Beach 110th, bikes are no longer allowed on the boardwalk. They now have to go onto the street to go through the bike lane that way. And so I understand we always have had you have to dismount from your bike in certain zones near the concessions, which obviously makes sense. But to now shift and say that no one can ride for most of the day during the summer months there and instead go into the street, I wanted to understand what that process was like, because it seems like the community was caught off guard. The community board does not recall getting any notification on that. And I also want to know if DOT supports that change. One particular comment that came to my office stood out to me, and that was about the children. The children that take advantage of the bike lanes on the boardwalk that may be learning how to ride the bike, we're now shifting them into the street. While some of it is, I believe, protected, it is a lot safer for them on the boardwalk. It's a better environment also. So I just want to understand that.
Hi, Councilmember, how are you? I would have to get additional information for Borough Commissioner, but I know that she works with her sister role over in the Queensborough Commissioner's Office in the Parks Department. But as to the specifics, I'm hearing this in real time from you, and we're going to get you something robust.
Okay, so if I can hear back before the week is out, that'd be great. I believe we have a community board meeting coming up. It may be tomorrow, but we may have a meeting coming up. So the sooner the better to be able to report back. I know it's tomorrow. Community board 14 is tomorrow because we have the Parks Borough area administrator that will be presenting. So if I could get it ahead of that to understand what happened there, that would be good. But you're not aware of any coordination or anything? Because I would imagine if they're shifting bike users to the street, they would communicate that with DOT to some extent.
I mean, that all sounds reasonable to me. I don't know the specifics here, but we can make sure that you have that well in advance of your follow-up meeting.
Thank you. Parking permit abuse, let me just run through all the questions real quick and you could just answer and let me know what you need me to repeat. The 2024 DOI report on parking permit abuse recommends a uniform process and parking permit system to curb abuse of the system. Is this something DOT supports? How many parking permits does DOT have issued annually, and how many are active at any given time? Does DOT internally track whether any of its parking permit holders have misused the permits? Does DOT have any measures in place to prevent or reduce misuse from occurring? And does DOT coordinate with NYPD in any way with respect to enforcement to ensure proper parking permit use?
Okay, these are excellent questions, Chair, and if I miss one of them in my response, if you could remind me, because there are a lot of them, but I'll do my best. So, yeah, we issue permits. Most of the permits that we issue are for citizens with disabilities, parking permits for people with disabilities, about 30 to 40,000 permits active at any given time in that group. It varies, it fluctuates, it depends how many people apply and whether they qualify and so forth. So that changes over time, but that's the biggest group of permits that we issue. We do issue agency permits as well, some to nonprofits like Meals on Wheels and that type of thing. And with all of the permits we issue, we try to uphold the highest standards of vetting, so that we're catching any people who are improperly trying to qualify for permits that they don't actually qualify for, and so that's a big part of it. The placards themselves have holographic seals and serial numbers. All of the placards that we issue are shared with NYPD every month, so they have a real-time database accessible to each traffic agent in the field to be able to verify the validity of any given DOT permit or placard in real time. We do certainly track misuse. There's a 3 strikes law, and when permits are misused 3 times, I believe it's in an 18-month period, we're able to revoke those permits. So that's something we track and revoke as needed.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Did you touch on the part in terms of the coordination with PD?
Yes, I did, and just to quickly recap it. Each month we send NYPD a database of all of the valid DOT permits. They integrate that into their system that the traffic enforcement agents use in the field. So each traffic enforcement agent is able to verify in real time as they're doing enforcement whether a DOT permit is legitimate or not.
Thank you for that. Thank you, DOT, for your testimony today. We are going to get ready to move into the public comment section of this. So I now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topics: oversight, parking infrastructure, and DOT. Proposed intro number 99A, a local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to the creation of curbside overnight truck parking sections in industrial business zones. Intro number 340, a local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to the automatic waiver of certain additional penalties for a parking violation if a vehicle owner responds to a notice of violation between 45 and 90 days of its issuance. Intro number 1138, a local law to amend the administrative code of the City of New York in relation to prohibiting standing or parking a vehicle within 20 feet of a crosswalk at an intersection. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. I'll now call the first panel: Jean Ryan, Monica Bartley, Evan Yankee, Farhan Sharif, Gloria Boyce-Charles. And Jean, you can start whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Jean Ryan, President of Disabled in Action of Metropolitan New York, DIA for short. I use a wheelchair out of the house and have for 30 years. Street safety is of particular importance to people with disabilities, especially blind people, people with mobility disabilities, and children. We want and need daylighting at every intersection where cars can turn into or out of the space, and we want hardened daylighting in a variety of ways so that cars cannot park in the space or drive through it. At one point, every wheelchair user I knew had been hit by a car while crossing the street. It's very common because drivers do not see us or they are not paying attention. I've had many close calls of coming close to being hit by a car or truck by mere inches. It's scary. I have grandchildren who live near me in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, but they live on a street where, because of parked cars right up to the cross street, none of us can see an oncoming car turning right from 7th Avenue until it's already turning into the crosswalk very near the curb ramp. Drivers don't see us, and we can't see them. We need daylighting there on 7th Avenue so that we can see oncoming turning cars. Since we do not have daylighting, we have taught our children to cross in the middle of the street where it's relatively safer. On my block, because it runs in the opposite direction, it's safe to cross in the crosswalk, but drivers have to pull way out into traffic to see if it's safe to turn. I mentioned this problem, which occurs all over, and the solution of daylighting way back before 2014 when I was on Community Board 10 in Bay Ridge. Sadly, there was some opposition because of lost parking spaces. And I remember a board member who was over 6 feet tall, one more sentence, saying that he had no problem crossing the street. Is there a height requirement for safely crossing the street? I hope not. DIA is in favor of Intro 1138. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monica Bartley, a board member of Disabled in Action. Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers and committee members for convening this hearing. I'm here today to voice my support for the proposed bill, Intro 1138, to prohibit parking or standing within 20 feet of a crosswalk and to require daylighting barriers. I'm a wheelchair user and frequently travel around New York City and Brooklyn, where I live. I'm always fearful that a driver may hit me when I enter the crosswalk because I'm in their blind spot, especially buses and trucks. For people with disabilities, especially those with visual impairment, mobility challenges, or who use assistive devices like walkers or wheelchairs, crossing the street can be one of the most dangerous parts of our day. When vehicles are parked too close to intersections, they block sight lines for both pedestrians and drivers, creating a deadly blind spot. This is even more dangerous for someone who moves more slowly or who cannot easily see or be seen. Daylighting, that is clearing the area around the crosswalk, would improve visibility. It gives drivers a chance to see someone stepping into the street before it is too late. It gives people with disabilities more time and space to navigate safely. And importantly, it sends a message that our city values inclusive and accessible infrastructure. This legislation is not just about traffic rules. It is about equity, accessibility, and saving lives. By prioritizing visibility and safety, this bill helps build a city where people with disabilities can move around with dignity and confidence. I urge you to pass it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Evan Yankee, Advocacy Director for Brooklyn Center for Independence of the Disabled, a disability-led not-for-profit that has provided services to the disability community and advocated for the independence of people with disabilities since 1956. We strongly support daylighting as a practice to make the streetscape safe for pedestrians, including disabled New Yorkers and visitors. While the increased use of daylighting will make the streets safer for everyone, it is a particularly valuable way of reducing the risk to wheelchair users who now are obscured by parked vehicles. Daylighting will increase their ability to see vehicles on the road and for drivers to see them. We do have some concerns with the implementation of daylighting in New York City as it has occurred so far, and urge the council amend Intro 1138 to take them into account. Concrete barriers have been known to be installed in locations that block access to curb cuts, ramps, and public plazas for people with disabilities. Implementation of daylighting without considering street accessibility is an impediment to safety. For example, our offices on 25 Elm Place in downtown Brooklyn have concrete blocks installed in a small daylighting space on a single-lane one-way street. And the implementation has meant not only that accessorized vehicles are unable to drop off passengers with disabilities at the curb cut, but that the person with a disability dropped off in the middle of the block will be forced to travel into the single stream of traffic to get to a curb cut. Our office building includes several organizations serving people with disabilities and can have between 40 to 60 people who use Access-a-Ride in the office on a given day. The barriers to access and dangerous choices that people with disabilities are forced to make because of this single damaging implementation of daylighting would be more widespread if protections for accessibility are not written into this bill. Before moving forward with Intro 1138, we urge that sections D, E, and F be amended to specifically include consideration of people with disabilities and Access-a-Ride users. We also urge the bill be revised to recognize that Access-a-Ride vehicles and other vehicles transporting passengers with disabilities to drop off and pick up passenger must be accommodated. These vehicles are required to provide door-to-door service to people with disabilities, and many people with disabilities are unable to travel to alternate locations on the block to chase a vehicle. Daylighting implementation that blocks off safe and proper spots for these vehicles to do pickups and drop-offs will make New York City streets significantly worse for everyone. Finally, we urge the bill require the Department of Transportation both respond promptly to complaints of access caused by daylighting and to track accessibility issues with implementation. Because daylighting offers such significant benefits for pedestrian safety, including the safety of people with disabilities, we would not want our concerns about this bill to be used to prevent daylighting from being pursued. We merely ask that accessibility considerations be moved to the forefront of implementation considerations, and we believe this change will improve safety for all on the street. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to working with you on many of these issues.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Gloria Boyce Charles, and I'm from the Brookville Springfield Gardens community in Queens. I'm here this morning to talk a little bit about the Intro 99. I want to thank the council for introducing this important and innovative piece of legislation for considering ways that we can address some of the hard problems in our New York City communities, specifically around overnight, legal overnight truck parking. There's no question but that the illegal parking of trucks poses a safety hazard for our children, our families, our pedestrians, and even other drivers. I recognize that this hearing focuses in on parking, which is largely a land use, real estate kind of an issue, but I do want us to acknowledge the intersectionality of another issue here, and that's air quality. And when you talk about Southeast Queens, the Brookville community, the Springfield community, we're at ground zero for JFK Airport runways and also for the air cargo activity. So we experience a tremendous amount of truck activity through our communities. And it impacts not only our safety, but our air quality. In particular, there are very high levels of black carbon emissions that are coming out of these diesel trucks. And also something that's, and let me just say that some of that has been measured at least the 61st percentile. So we're really exposed to high levels of some of these particulate matters. And not only is it that we're exposed to those kinds of things that we are measuring, but there are some things in the air that we're not measuring, and it's ultrafine particulate matter that's coming from the jet fuel, from the airplanes that fly over our heads. We're right at the runway. So please consider that when you're looking at how these trucks are getting to the IBZ, there are people living in the IBZ. There are businesses in the IBZ. How are the trucks getting there? And where are they parking? They're impacting those people also and the surrounding communities. So I'd like for, in your design of this legislation, please consider those things and consider that there is a lot of space on the JFK Airport, which is undergoing a huge redevelopment, and the air cargo facility recently has expanded to include over 1 million square feet of real estate across 8 facilities. For our Southeast Queens community, I personally would like to suggest that you consider finding on-airport parking facilities for the trucks. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Farhan Sharif. I am a resident of Queens, and I am here today to express my opposition to Intro 1138. As a driver, I understand the challenge of navigating intersections when visibility is blocked by vehicles parked too close to corners, but mandating 20 feet of clearance at every intersection, effectively removing a full parking spot, disregards the lived realities of many New Yorkers, especially those living in transit deserts such as Eastern Queens. This blanket approach fails to consider that what works for one neighborhood might not work for others. Further, adding bike racks, rocks, or planters does not resolve the issue, it compounds it. We've already seen declining quality of life with DOT's e-scooter rollout, which has triggered significant backlash in our communities. If traffic safety is the goal, we must reform the Department of Transportation. Countless 311 complaints, ranging from illegal parking to speed bump requests, go ignored or are denied after months of silence. A more effective DOT would alleviate the burden on NYPD and better serve our communities. I urge the council to proceed with caution. Just because something works in one neighborhood does not mean that it will work everywhere. What's effective in Manhattan might not suit Staten Island. What does not work in the Bronx might still work in Queens. We must be intentional in crafting legislation that values all New Yorkers, regardless of borough or zip code. Solving one problem by creating another will only push residents out of the city that we are trying to improve. Thank you for giving me the time to testify.
Thank you all. I'm so glad we have representation from Southeast Queens here today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
The next panel we'll call up will be Zach Miller, Pete Sikora, Jennifer Whitney, John Herney or Henny, and Elizabeth I'm gonna give this a go. Elizabeth Dennis, maybe? Once again, just reminding everybody to please adhere to the 2-minute rule, and we can get started once you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Brooks Powers and members of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. My name is Zach Miller. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Trucking Association of New York. I have full written testimony submitted, but I think in the interest of time, I certainly don't need to read it. I just want to say we are strongly supportive of Intro 99, and we really, really appreciate the leadership of this committee, not just with Intro 99, but the overnight truck parking bill that was passed a few years ago, as well as the Truck Route Modernization Act, as well as the oversight hearing you had on electrification. These are holistic solutions that will serve to address not just today's truck parking challenges, but some of the future challenges that we expect to see with an increase in freight tonnage. So, from the industry, thank you. We are grateful for these common sense solutions, and we look forward to continued collaborations with the council.
Turn your mic on, please.
Is it on? Okay. Hi, my name is Jennifer Whitney, and I live on the Upper East Side, and I'm here to testify in support of Intro 1138. I'm an architect who works on transportation and infrastructure projects, so I'm well aware, as I'm sure you are, of how challenging, costly, and lengthy it can be to implement built improvements in the city. Comparatively, creating a daylit intersection is relatively cheap and fast, with significant safety improvements. By simply laying down some paint and placing some boulders or planters, you have automatically made the intersection safer for everyone. As an architect, what excites me the most is the next step, which is what you can do with the daylit area. Stormwater mitigation, increased greenery and tree canopies, bus shelters, bike parking, public art and social spaces. These are all needed improvements to make New York more resilient, accessible, and beautiful. And consider the price of planning these improvements individually as separate programs. These are inevitable costs of investing in a city, but daylighting includes the free and invaluable return of saving lives. Daylighting intersection presents a powerful opportunity to make life-saving improvements that address the unique needs of each community citywide. Every intersection offers the potential for positive change. I urge the council to pass Intro 1138, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Hi, my name is Pete Sikora, and I'm with New York Communities for Change. I'm the Climate Campaigns Director. We're a community organization in New York City with about 20,000 members. We organize in Black and Latino low-income communities. We support the daylighting legislation, which is an obvious and common sense safety measure. Who amongst us hasn't had the experience of being almost run over by a car that is going too fast through an intersection where they can't see the crosswalk? That happened to my wife with our son. She was entering the intersection. She had the right of way. My son went a little bit faster than he should have, and the driver just came right through, going way too fast in a non-daylighted intersection. It's not clear if the driver saw them at all, but it was a real close shave, and that happens commonly in this city, and sadly with tragic results. Daylighting will also reduce pollution saving lives, not just directly by preventing accidents, but by preventing air pollution that causes asthma, emphysema, heart disease, stroke, all of those things. So please pass this legislation is what our organization recommends. I also just wanted to comment on the DOT and Mayor Adams' absurd study. The mayor is corrupt and incompetent, and the DOT is proposing a study that is nonsense. We all know that that study's garbage. You should disregard it. You should plow right over the mayor's BS. Thank you.
Please keep the noise down. Have the gestures.
How's it going, everyone? My name is John Heaney. I'm from this city. I've lived in Astoria for about 8 years now. Currently, I serve on the board of the 31st Avenue Open Streets Collective. It's an all-volunteer organization, runs from April through December, and we see firsthand what safer streets can bring to our community. We see that with free programming, seating open to all. I'm testifying here in support of CM Wan's Intro 1138. Sorry, I'm not used to speaking in front of people. Daylighting hits particularly close to home for our district. In 2023, it was Queens Community Board 1, representing Astoria, Woodside, and East Elmhurst, that sparked a citywide movement when it passed the first ever resolution calling for universal daylighting. It came after the tragic death of 7-year-old Dolmanda Dut, who died crossing Newton Road at 45th Street when a driver failed to yield at a stop sign, just didn't see her. It still bothers me today, so I'm sorry. Since then, 21 community boards have signed on for universal daylighting in their districts. And a red light and a curb extension was put in that intersection, thankfully. That advocacy that influenced the Western Queens Street Safety Plan from our elected officials includes universal daylighting. It also encourages the NYC DOT to implement daylighting along select commercial corridors in Astoria like Broadway, which has instantly made street-level safety feel better for all. That's pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. Earlier this year, our organization led a robust outreach campaign via social media and flyering to gather suggestions from our neighbors for where they would like to see daylighting implemented in our community. It spurred up almost 150 responses with detailed descriptions of specific locations where residents of all backgrounds, parents, children, couples, older New Yorkers, so many more, they felt unsafe crossing the street due to a lack of visibility. Each submission tells a different story and calls on the city to do better. This is a slam dunk, no-brainer bill that will save lives across all of the city. Please pass Intro 1138. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Dunnies, and I'm a volunteer co-chair of Transportation Alternatives Brooklyn Activist Committee. I'm here today with my colleague and fellow co-chair Alex Morano, who I'm sure will testify soon. Together, we work with hundreds of activists in central Brooklyn to fight for safer streets in our communities. We adamantly support Intro 1138 to make universal daylighting the law in New York City. Cities around the world are embracing daylighting as a common sense measure to make streets safer and scale green infrastructure to build climate resilience. It is beyond time that New York City does the same. All of us use the city streets every day and have friends and family who do as well. The experience of trying to cross a street and having to peer around a parked vehicle or go halfway into the intersection to see if it is actually safe to move forward is very well known. These conditions, the extremely poor visibility, are simply unsafe. And it probably comes as no surprise to any of us that most crashes in New York City happen at intersections without daylighting because of this. By the time you poke your head around the end of a SUV parked in a corner, cars already so close to you that they practically brush you. And children in New York City are nowhere near being able to see over the large SUVs that are common on our streets today. Universal daylighting fixes this. Adding visibility at intersections that we need in order to cross streets and enter those intersections safely. It's common sense, and we know it works, with several studies showing universal daylighting reduces crashes anywhere from 14 to 30%. A crash reduction of this amount in New York would greatly improve the health and wellness of our city, reducing the financial and personal cost of crashes for all New Yorkers. There are nearly 100,000 crashes a year in New York City. This has to change. No New Yorker should be killed or hurt just for trying to cross the street. And universal daylighting is an essential but proven, simple, and scalable response that will help to keep New Yorkers safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm gonna just allow Councilmember Narcisse to do a statement.
I want to say thank you for coming and testifying. Universal daylight, we're talking about the safety of our street. While we thinking how safe everyone should be, and we're going to continue to collaborate to make sure that people not taking it for granted, thinking that it's okay for our street not to be safe. We want our streets to be safe. So, but some streets are very narrow in our city, then that's where I'm gonna say we cannot do one size fit all, but we have to be mindful to keep folks to cross the streets safe in New York City. And I wanna say thank you for coming to testifying. Thank you, I appreciate your time.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember Rivera. We are going to take a short recess so that we can move this hearing to the committee room. And so we will do about 10 minutes.
So everyone, make sure you come to the committee room after you use the restroom. The committee room right in that door next door. Please don't leave.
Once again, if you are remaining for the Transportation Committee, we are moving over to the committee room. Folks, your attention, please. We'll ask everyone to please go through the door to my left. I'm pointing at the door to make the way into the committee room.
We get trapped in there, like can't move 1 inch.